Hi there, Jesse here with eTrailer. Today we'll be taking a look at and I'll show you how to install the Air Lift LoadLifter 5000 air helper springs on the rear axle of this 2021 Ram 1500. Air helper springs like this Air Lift kit are really going to improve the ride of your truck, especially when you're towing or hauling heavy loads. If you've ever towed or hauled with the factory suspension, you'll notice that your rear end of your truck will sag down a little bit. That's really going to affect the way the truck drives. What that does is it takes weight off of the front of the vehicle. That's where all your steering components are, and also that's where most of your braking is going to come from. So not only does that affect your comfort level and handling, it's going to affect your stopping distance, which is definitely not something you want. So adding helper springs like this kit will definitely improve that. They replace the factory bump stop, which may look like this. These are just here, not really to improve the ride quality or prevent any sag at all. They're really just here to prevent any metal-on-metal contact. So the Air Lift helper springs will help level your ride out. The Air helper springs are also adjustable, which is a big plus. Our neighbor today actually had these Timbren bump stops installed, which do prevent the sag, but they will definitely affect the ride quality of the truck. You'll feel a lot stiffer ride, especially if you have any weight in the back, and it's not adjustable at all, which is a big downside to these. I would say if you're somebody who maybe has a lot of toolboxes mounted, you know that weight's always going to be in the back of the truck, this might be a good option for you. But if you're just somebody who drives a truck and tows and hauls with it and needs that adjustability that you can get by adjusting the PSI in these, I think air helper springs are definitely the way to go. The bags have a range of adjustability from 5 to 100 PSI. They do recommend not to go below 5 just to limit the risk of damaging the bags at all. The way you would adjust it is you would just come back to the back of the truck here with a air compressor. You'd take that cap off and just fill it up with a regular tire gauge. The adjustability is there. It's pretty easy, but we almost always recommend to add a compressor whenever you're getting air helper springs on the back of your truck. As far as this install goes, it is on the difficult side, I'd say. You do have to do some grinding and cutting. So if it's not something you're looking to do yourself, maybe you don't have the time, the space, or the tools to do so, feel free to check out our dealer locator. However, if you are looking to get these bags set up yourself, then follow along and I'll show you how we did ours. You'll want to start out by removing your spare and getting that out of your way. Once that's out of the way, we're going to have to remove these heat shields for now. So there's just a few 10mm bolts holding them in. And they're two separate pieces. So for this one, there's a bolt here and then two underneath here. And just set that aside for now. Now we just need to find a way to get the weight off the rear of the truck. Since we're using a lift that holds the truck by the tires, I just have to have this transmission stand here lifting up on the hitch. If you're working on the floor, just use your floor jack and lift up the truck by the frame. But once we have some separation between our bump stop, which yours will probably look a little different. This is an aftermarket bump stop that I'm removing for our neighbor, but just take a pry bar, find a way to get some leverage. And we'll set that aside. Now for the hardest part of this install, we will have to cut off our bump stop bracket here. So what I recommend is just get as close to the weld as possible there, and then kind of cut slightly up. That way that whole thing will come off, and then we'll do the same thing on the other side. Over here on the driver's side, you do have your plastic fuel tank back here, so I always recommend to hang a piece of metal or wood. Anything you have. I like to keep extra license plates around for stuff like this, so I'll just make sure that stays while I'm cutting and make sure no sparks hit this fuel tank. For this, I'm using a Sawzall. You can use anything you have that will cut metal. I'll probably alternate from Sawzall to air hammer. It kind of helps spread it out so I can get the blade back up in there, but I'll start cutting it right now. pried the first cut down. That's going to give me better access since the fuel tank's in our way back there. I didn't quite get as close as I wanted to, but that's okay. We can come back through with a grinder and clean that up. I'm just trying to avoid cutting into the frame at all. A few scratches is okay, but we definitely don't want to slice into it. But let's have one more final cut, and also make sure you're not hitting any brake lines. Always double check your blade placement before you pull the trigger. Once you're done grinding, I recommend painting any scratched up surface here with black spray paint or something like that. Next up, we need to remove this bolt, because what we'll do is there's an included spacer that will lift these brake lines up out of the way of our upper bracket. So with a 13 millimeter, we can slide that out. And once that's removed, we'll slide our spacer under and use the included bolt and tighten that down. So slide your spacer between this bracket and that bracket. Take your new bolt and thread it into that hole. Then tighten it down with the 13 millimeter socket. Take the airbag, you'll see one side has 2 threaded holes, another threaded hole, but that's where our fitting goes. And then the other side just has 2 threaded holes. That's going to be our bottom. So flip it over with the 3 holes, put our top plate on, and then we'll take our fitting, just get it finger tight for now. And then about 1.5 turns. So there's 1, there's a half, and we want it facing out that way. We'll take our top brackets, line it up with our air fitting, set that down there, and we'll need 2 bolts, and we'll start with a lock washer, then our washer. This part can be kind of tricky if you have bigger hands. Slide it in there. We're just going to get these loosely tightened down for now. Just get them just snug. We'll be able to move this bracket around, so once everything's installed onto the truck, then we will tighten everything down. For our bottom bracket, we're going to install it with these tabs in the rear of the vehicle. So just double check your diagram to make sure you have everything oriented right. So flip it over and line up your holes. First put this cap on. Don't forget that cap. Now line up your holes. Take the flathead screws and your Allen wrench. And these we will tighten down. There's not a specific torque spec for them, but just nice and snug will be just fine. We need to get some carriage bolts fished into, I guess, these little slots up here in our frame that's going to hold our upper brace. So start with your fish wire and feed it through the non-coiled end. You'll have to put some bends in it because it's a pretty tight turn, but we're going through the rectangular part and coming out the slot. We'll do that on the lower and the upper. Once you get that in there, take your carriage bolt, thread it on, and pull that wire through. So for now, we'll leave the fish wire on, get our other one installed. Here's our upper bracket. You can see these slots line up with the slots on our frame, and it's going to be mounted in this position. So I'll feed our fish wires through the holes and get that up into place. Start with our top bolt. Just be careful, you got to keep some pressure on the bolt. So right now I'm pulling down on the brace to try to hold that bolt in place. Now take a flange nut and get that started again. Try to keep pressure on the carriage bolt so it doesn't drop back into the frame. Get that one finger tight, and then same process with the bottom one. Right now with the driver's side, it's a little bit different on this step. We only have the one slot to slide our carriage bolt through. So get that slotted through there. It's kind of tight against that nut we just installed, but the only difference with the passenger side is you'll have two of these slots, so just use two of the carriage bolts. But now we are ready to walk over to the truck and get this slipped into place. Now, lift it up into place. It's going to take some maneuvering to get everything positioned correctly, but you want to make sure these tabs back here are slotted in behind the lower frame brackets. And once you get those slotted in, you should be able to squeeze the bag and kind of work it into place. Just make sure you get this carriage bolt lined up and it slides through the slot there. Now we'll take another carriage bolt and reach around the back here and get that one slid into position. So now a little trick to get your nut started on this one. I jammed some painter's tape in here. You could also use paper or something, but that'll kind of hold the nut inside of my socket. And I'm kind of tilting this carriage bolt to the side because there's an odd angle. Just slot it in there and then thread it on. Now for these lower bolts, we can go ahead and torque those down now. If you don't have your own torque wrench, we do have some available here at etrailer, or you can most likely rent one from your local auto parts store. For our top carriage bolts that we need to install, they'll have to slide through here and go up. So what I recommend is first just kind of use that bolt to line your hole up to make sure everything's straight, and then come in at an angle. You may have to kind of move things around. It's really hard to get your fingers in there. Might help to maybe have some needle nose pliers to hold it. Now that we have both of those carriage bolts with nuts, I just kind of snugged everything down, and then I took our transmission jack out from under the rear of the truck, so all of the weight is on everything, and while you're lowering it down, it helps to kind of shift everything. Just make sure everything looks nice and straight and perpendicular. And then from there, we can torque all of our hardware down. For these inside top bracket bolts, there's really no way to torque them down. So if you have a ratcheting wrench like this, that's the easiest way to get them tight. So just tighten them down and get them pretty snug. Now we'll find a mounting place for our actual valves for our airlines. I like to put them right here. I removed the license plate. These are the holes where the screws that hold the license plate go. So I'm just going to drill those out to 5/16. Just be careful not to drill too far. You don't want to hit any wiring or anything. Once we get those drilled out, we'll be able to get our airline started on this end. For your airline tubing, it will come as one piece, so just stretch it out and cut it halfway down the middle. So we'll be working with this end for now. I have a nut spun on just about all the way back, and then one of these lock washers. And I'll just slide it through here. Just be careful while you're doing this not to kink the hose too much. Get that to poke through. I'll put a solid washer on it, followed by a rubber. Once we have our airlines fed through, we can slide our license plate over. Then I grabbed some extra washers. Not really necessary, it's just I think it'll grip better, but if you don't have any washers laying around, that's fine. Then we'll take our nuts, get that started. Once you do get it started, you will take a socket. This is a 13mm socket, and tighten it down. Do that for both sides. Once you've figured out a route to work your airline back, you'll just have to kind of reach your finger in here because that fitting on the airbag does turn. But once you get everything lined up, just give it a nice firm push, and you should feel it click just a little bit more. That means it's locked in. Give it a little tug afterwards, and that means everything is locked in. But from there, I'm just going to clean up my line, make sure it's away from any hot parts like the exhaust or suspension components. You don't want to be around any moving components. But I'll clean my line up and I'll show you what it looks like afterwards. So here's my routing. I came out from the bag here, just followed some factory lines and stayed tight to the frame. Came up above our frame here, and I had a little bit of extra slack. I'm going to leave that in case there's any maintenance or changes they want to make down the road. So left some slack, just lift it up. Keep in mind your spare tire will be right about here, so make sure it's up above that level. Now we'll just fill our bags up to 40 to 60 psi, and once they're full, I'll go around and spray our fittings down with some soapy water. I'll also spray down these ones that are already made for us right here just in case, but I'll spray them down and wait for a little bit and look for any small bubbles appearing. We have this heat shield. This is going to go and cover our exhaust nearest our airbag here. So how we do that is you'll just kind of mock it up to the exhaust, try to take the shape of it. Then these two tabs, bend them out and then flat, so that when we run our hose clamps around it, this is going to stay away from the exhaust and not going to rest right on it, because then it wouldn't really do anything. So I'll just take the included hose clamps and get that installed. Now that we have that heat shield installed and we verified that we indeed do not have any leaks, all that's left is to throw our spare tire back up, and don't forget to reinstall that heat shield that we took down earlier. Otherwise, that's going to do it for our look at and installation of the Air Lift LoadLifter 5000 helper springs on our 2021 Dodge Ram 1500.